Welcome to this edition of Inside the Academy Studio.
Today's conversation will be about Richard Linklater's Boyhood. Boyhood was written by Richard Linklater and was filmed over 12 years, beginning in the early 2000s, and it explores the idea of what it means to grow up through the nascent eyes of Mason Evan Jr., played by newcomer Eller Coltrane. His sister, played by Richard's daughter, Lorelei Linklater, their single mother, played by Patricia Arquette, and their at-length father, Ethan Hawke. Obviously, this film is a grand experiment of filmmaking, so I think it's apt that we talk about the process. I know some can argue that, okay, you have 12 years to film and you're only doing a couple a day. That should give you plenty of time, that it's not really a stressful filmmaking process. But I'd argue that having your script, your actors, your entire team focused and consistent year to year, that it seems so subtle that in your editing changes, even in the character reactions, that they're naturally growing up and they're not different characters every year, is a difficult task. How do you kind of discuss how difficult this film was to make in just the filmmaking scheme?
Yeah, and I think there's proof, and I think I found proof in a very strange example when we saw the ending of How I Met Your Mother, and it flips to a scene that was filmed 5-6 years before the finale, and how awkwardly it's inserted into the overall flow of something that was filmed that year. Versus in this movie, where you're piecing together 12 years, it flows seamlessly year to year to year. So just because a movie is filmed into segments and like a week or two a year, and then piece together, doesn't mean that it's an easy process. It is still a challenge for not only the actors to get back into the character, for the director and the screenwriters to make sure that they're telling a story that does justice to the characters that they want to portray.
Absolutely, and you have to imagine, Richard Linklater, I think, directed at least 3 films over the tenure of this period anyway. His most commercial film, School of Rock, he did 2 before films. So he was busy and he had to do this. I think this film could have been an absolutely incoherent mess, and I guess it'll be interesting to see. They shot a lot of footage, and it only kind of parsed into a 2-hour and 45-minute film, but it easily could have become incoherent. Character motivations change, just strictly the faith you put in young actors becoming a little older actors. I think in a filmmaking sense, it's a difficult challenge, and I don't think many are going to try this again. As much as this film is about growing up, and I often said after watching it, there's probably enough material where you could have a girlhood movie just with Samantha's character, but there's 2 different kind of parents we see on screen, obviously. We see the nitty-gritty of Patricia Arquette's Olivia character. You see your highs and lows because you're with her all the time, because Mason's with her all the time. But then you have the Ethan Hawke character who kind of comes in once in a while and leaves, and that's generally a positive progression, at least through Mason's eyes. Is that fair to say that if we were to spend time with Ethan Hawke's character, that he wouldn't have been portrayed as this someone who just kept getting better, and it'd be more similar to what Olivia is? Or is it just a boy is always going to feel a different emotion being parented by his mother than his father?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it shows 2 things of the same thing. It does show that a boy usually has a different relationship with each parent. That's just a fact of life. And on top of the fact that he's living with his mother and doesn't see his father every day, so you're gonna react differently to people based on how often you interact with them and how you interact with them. For example, there's these small interactions he has with his mother where he doesn't want to do the dishes because I do that for my job. Well, you're an expert, go do it. Versus his father, he talks about more bigger topics in his mind, where he talks about, well, I want to talk about my girlfriend. I want to talk about what I should do. What should I do for school? Things like that. In a weird way, it's kind of like his dad's in the macro world and his mom's in the micro world. So even if he may get more more. It seems like he gets more agitated at his mother's interactions. I think at the end of the day, this movie shows why both are so important in developing you from boyhood into manhood.
Absolutely. The Academy has recognized both Patricia Arquette and Ethan Hawke in the supporting categories. Let's quickly talk about them. Obviously, Arquette, it's a career-defining role for her. You know, somebody who's done bit parts and has had roles in TV. She'll also be on TV starting next month again, so that's her comfort zone. She inhabits the growing process like Mason's character. You know, we see Olivia grow, you know, from a young single mother in her 20s to a more financially secure but still emotionally worried person in her 40s. It's a beautiful transformation, and her final scene in this film is heart-wrenching. You know, when she kind of says goodbye to her status quo when she sees Mason off to college. And then Ethan Hawke is somebody who knows Richard Linklater so well, so you expected this collaboration to work, but he still does a great job in being the slimy father, then the encouraging father. It's a total performance and something you expect from Ethan Hawke, especially with Richard Linklater.
Yeah, and I think that's also a great strength in this movie is that it's not just about Mason Jr. growing up; it's about all the characters around him that are adapting and changing to their new circumstances. So I think that's why it shows a dichotomy between how his mother reacts to him leaving for college and how his father reacts. His father obviously indicates that he probably wasn't ready to be a father when Mason was a child and when he needed him at that time, and he came into his own a bit later. While his mother was sacrificed a lot more for him at that time, and when Mason was ready to leave and go on his own, his mother wasn't ready for that. So it once again shows the great, like a lot of those subtle changes that can show such great differences between characters and how it affects them.
Moving on, if you're of a certain age, you relate to this film, I guess, in different ways. But one thing I found interesting was the dedication that Linklater and his crew put towards putting contemporary music in Boyhood, you know, as part of its soundtrack. It's kind of the what is hot of each year. And it's a better indicator than, you know, simply putting up, hey, it's 2006. You put up, you know, a scene or a segment or something that's culturally significant. And a lot of times it's the music here. And I think that's a great success because, you know, music is the soundtrack of people's lives. And they instantly know, hey, I know where I was when that Coldplay song came up. When Samantha does the Britney Spears thing, it's like, hey, I knew kids who imitated Britney Spears. So just talk about the impact of using these contemporary songs, which were not cheap, but were, I think, fairly successful in kind of showing the time progressing.
Yeah, I think it's probably the most expensive decision Linklater had to make, but it was probably the best decision he made. Using popular songs from the years that he's actually growing up makes a film seem about 3 more times more grounded than it could have been. Because at the end of the day, as much as credit you give to some kids for being culturally astute and being students of history, they're gonna listen to what's popular at the time, and that's gonna reflect their childhood. You can claim to be someone who disdains pop music, but you're gonna, in one way or another, you're gonna have that. Just like kids are today, you're gonna have that certain memories and relationships, even that Taylor Swift song that's always on the radio. So, using songs was just was a great way to bring you into that time period and how it felt at that time.
And also the movie-making freedom that Linklater had allowed him to choose a very unique setting. You know, we don't often see Austin, Texas. We don't often see the suburbs of Houston. That, I think, if this film was made in LA or New York, you wouldn't have the same connection you do that it's set in something you're not as familiar with, but seems familiar. So two people who grew up outside of the major hubs. The freedom of filming where and when he wanted just created a sense of, intimacy with this film that would be hard to duplicate say if the kid grew up in New York City. Do you tend to agree?
Yeah, it gave it a very pan-American cultural feel that, I mean, Texas is a very diverse state, right? You see it from all the different shooting locations you see in the movie. So there was something in the movie that anybody could relate to, whether it was something experience he had as a child or something that he did. For example, I really enjoyed the scene where he goes to a baseball game and sees Roger Clemens pitch. That was definitely a highlight of my own childhood. So seeing that on screen just brought back those memories.
Great. We're almost done this episode of Inside the Academy Studio, and like always, we like to end with certain questions. So I'm going to ask, what was your favorite moment of Boyhood? And I'm going to start with this. I think it's one of the more gripping scenes. It's when Mason has seen his mother being abused by her second husband, Bill, the professor, and they have that very tense dinner where basically the kids are trying to ask something, and Bill is now, he's had a couple of drinks, he's full on abusive, and he whips a glass at Mason, and it's just a stunning scene, and up until that point, Mason hasn't been exposed to a lot of hatred or violence, and to see that and how that kind of shapes him when they move away and how angry he is kind of a big consequence of that scene, I felt. How about you? What's your favorite moment?
Yeah, that's a scene that definitely brought a lot to the movie, I agree. But I'm going to choose something that also shows that there are big moments in life that will shape and affect you, but there's also a lot of smaller moments. And I found one scene that really brought that out was when Mason, who has his really long hair when he's like 9 years old, is forced to get a haircut. And it's really short, he's really embarrassed. And it just shows that I think that was probably the best performance I saw from Eller Coltrane when he was 9 years old in this movie. It just so perfectly captured that insecurity that you have when you're a child. Because when you're a child, you kind of go back and forth. You're not really sure what even your interests are sometimes. So to have a haircut and go into a new school in a new place, it was so accurately done. And I thought there's a few other scenes like in the movie, and I thought it really helps elevate it to the next level.
Yeah, it's a very childhood specific moment, but it does play to bigger consequences. Least favorite moment. It's another moment heavy on dialogue, I felt, but kind of just circled around the truth. I was a big fan of Mason's girlfriend in high school, Sheena. I think Zoe Graham did a great job of being a very down to earth, natural kind of performance. But their conversation over while they're eating queso late night in Austin when they're visiting her sister, it kind of circled the tracks. It kind of felt too long, too late in the film, and did not really achieve anything. Where it kind of felt like I don't need that. I understand some of the things of the anxiety they were feeling, and that's common. But in that time in the film, I felt it was just circling the track. So that's something I would have, not liked in the film. What's your least favorite moment of Boyhood?
I think my least favorite moment of Boyhood is there's a scene where his mother, Olivia, meets the landscaper working on his home and encourages him to go to school. And then you flip like 7 or 8 years in the future, and he's assistant manager at a restaurant and working on his degree, and he credits his mother. And I can understand the point behind that scene because you think, okay, Mason doesn't always appreciate all the things his mother's done for him at times, you feel. But at the same time, I thought it was a little too convenient in a movie that lends itself to realistic depictions, and it felt like something a little more out of a conventional Hollywood script rather than Boyhood, which is this grand experiment in filmmaking. Okay.
The last thing we do is word association. So when you think Boyhood, what word do you think of?
I think grass, because the poster, which is pretty bad, I know.
And I think midnight release party, because one of the scenes they're at the Half-Blood Prince midnight release. So when we think of Boyhood, we think of grass and midnight release parties. That has been this edition of Inside the Academy Studio.
Thank you.